Hello, everyone. I'm waiting for more people to come in, but hello, everyone that's here. Hi, Rob. How are you? Hear me?
Good, thank you.
That's good. Thanks for joining us tonight.
No worries.
We've got Sigi Koko from Down to Earth Design. I was just chatting with Sigi before, saying that I found her work around 10 years ago, and it was very, very inspiring in terms of building materials. Sigi Koko is the principal designer at Down to Earth Design, which she founded in 1998 to help people achieve their dreams of living in natural, healthy homes. She translates each client's vision into a unique building design that reflects their personality and lifestyle while responding to the surrounding landscape and climate, which obviously building biologists love. Sigi's uniquely collaborative design processes provides a high level of information support, encouraging her clients to engage fully throughout design and construction. Sigi also teaches natural building workshops that empower her clients to contribute meaningfully during the construction of their own homes. So, absolute legend of natural building, Sigi, thank you so much for joining us.
I don't know about legend, but you're welcome.
You are. It's so good just using the earth and the magic of the earth to actually be energy efficient, really.
Yeah. I mean, I grew up in a very practical family. My mom's German, and if things don't make sense, you question them. So
Yes,
we
100%.
did.
I'm glad they did and you did. Very good for the natural building world.
Hmm.
Yeah, so I guess, did you have something that you wanted to, like a set thing to talk, a presentation?
Yeah,
Or
I have a little presentation with visuals and whatnot, so I thought I would just there's quite a few slides, but I'll run through them quickly so that it's not, there's time for questions.
no problem at all. I've got the screen share on now, so you should be able to do that.
Okay.
And then we can have questions later as well, as more people are entering too.
Oh, there we go. And then, do you want me to just go for it? Just start?
Yes, please. Thank you very much.
Excellent. All right. So I'm Sigi Koko. I design natural buildings that are appropriate for the climate, as Kelly mentioned. Um, and I work mostly in the eastern part of the United States. So it's morning here, even though it's evening there. So you've had your full day, and I'm just getting up, not even caffeinated yet. So, and then what I do for fun is I teach because I love watching people get empowered. Um, so I teach people how to get money and make something productive out of it. Um, and I was inspired by Antoni Gaudí, who sort of famously he's not with us anymore. He created these very fanciful but extremely structurally intelligent buildings. And so that notion of having a building also be a sculpture is quite intriguing to me as well. He also drew quite a bit from, I don't know if you could see it from I don't know how to go back. Um, he drew a lot from nature in terms of how the structures went together. So that not every tree is straight. He wouldn't make every column straight either. He would sort of follow these forms that he saw in nature. So that was also quite intriguing to me. And then the way that I question our construction paradigm, and I don't know what it's like in Australia, but in the US we don't build smart buildings. Like we don't think about where are you building and what are your energy goals. Those are not the questions. The person who builds it is disconnected from whoever's going to use it and whoever's going to pay the bills. And so there's no concern for health or energy efficiency unless there's a regulation to tell them to do that. So because of that,
We're
I
very
sort
much
of
the same here.
is
We are
it,
very,
oh,
very
that
much,
bums me out.
very much the same. Yeah.
So, it shouldn't be that way, right? We should be thinking about the long-term impacts of every building we build. It's so energy intensive to make a building. So to me, I pose a different set of questions. And those questions are just what if we thought about every material that goes into the building? Um, and what if we use the materials that we have around us instead of importing things from very far away? And then what if we use those materials to create buildings that just because of what the material choices were and the way that you design it for the place you are, it's energy efficient, just for those two reasons, right? And then there's this piece of being able to meaningfully participate during construction that gives you a totally different sense of ownership. We just had oh, I think I may have paused for a second. We just had a clay wall building workshop here this weekend, and it was so beautiful to watch people feel ownership for their section of wall. And then at the end of the workshop, they would take a selfie with their section of wall. And it's because they made it. And again, if you can do that when you build your own house, even if it's little things, you can meaningfully contribute. You own your house in a different way. You made it. It's like your art project you do when you're a kid, and you're so excited to bring it home. You get that same feeling every single time in your home. And so then the question becomes, well, what makes a building a natural building? And to me, my definition is using the materials you have locally available around you in abundance that you can harvest without harm. And then understanding the physical properties of those materials so that you can use them in a way that creates an energy efficient building. And so then, okay, how do we do that? So we can unpack that as well. And so the very first thing, always, is start with where, right? Where means what is your material sort of palette that you're drawing from, and where means what are the specifics of your climate? Like you're in quite a different climate than I am. For one, we have a different orientation to the sun, right? For me, the equator is south of me. For you, it's north of you. If our buildings don't look different, that doesn't make any sense, does it? Right? So just thinking about where's the wind, where's the sun, um, which direction of the sun can you control, what materials are around you, is there shade, is there not shade, etc., etc., etc. And so the questions that you ask are, when will I need energy? When do most people around me need energy to create comfort, right? So for us, we have 4 seasons. So the typical home that doesn't think about where it's located, that's not designed with an efficient envelope, they're heating in winter and they're cooling in summer. So they're using energy twice. Basically all year. They just turn a system on, they close their windows, and they let the system keep them comfortable. That's so intensive, right? And there is a way to minimize that, at least eliminate the cooling where we are, right? And where you are, it may be more heating. I don't know. I've never lived in Australia, but I imagine it's just warm all the time, right? So understanding your full year, what are your average temperatures all around the year? Is it dry? Is it humid? Because humid warm air is less comfortable than dry warm air, even at the same temperature, right? Understanding what your rainfall is so that you know, do you want to try to use the building to capture rain or not, etc., right? So you're trying to understand where you are. What are the things that could be challenges? How can you use those challenges to your advantage? And how can you design a building so that your um, comfort challenges can be met just by how you've designed it, not through systems, not through, you know, an HVAC system, that's keeping you warm or cool or whatever. And it all begins with your relationship to the sun. So this graphic, I apologize, is for the northern hemisphere. So you have to switch your north and south here. But the one direction that you can control the sun, because it changes from winter to summer, is when you're facing the equator. So for you, that's facing north. When you face north, in the summertime, the sun is higher in the sky, and in the wintertime, the sun is lower in the sky. It's always low to the east when it rises. It's always low to the west when it sets. But facing the equator, you have this change from winter to summer. You also generally have a change in average temperature. So it might not be as dramatic where you are. It's quite dramatic where we are. We get about an 80-degree temperature swing from winter to summer. 80 degrees Fahrenheit. Are you Celsius?
Yes, degrees Celsius. Yeah.
Oh, I don't know how to do that in Celsius. I apologize. So it's about, let me think here. We have about, oh, how is it similar? We have about a 45-degree difference in Celsius
So,
is our swing.
so did you say 80 degrees Fahrenheit?
So the swing in temperature from winter to summer. So our average in winter is 20 degrees Fahrenheit. So that would be negative 7 or 8, maybe
Yeah,
Celsius.
seven, -7.
Yeah. Yeah. And then we get up to 100 degrees Fahrenheit. So is that 40?
I'm just on the converter.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yes, yeah, 38. Yeah.
Yeah, so right, so that's the swing we experience here. I don't know if it's as dramatic there.
It's all different,
But
yeah,
that
in different
means,
states.
yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, right, because big country.
yeah. So many differences.
Right. So um so what that means is you can use that difference between the angle of the sun in winter and summer to your advantage, where you can help keep your inside space warmer in winter because the sun angle is low, and still stay cool in summer when the sun is high, because your relationship to the sun, the windows facing that direction, the relationship changes, right? So in winter, the low sun comes in summer, the high sun stays out, and then you can calculate how much glass you put on so that you can exactly calculate how much solar heat gain you get, right? So there's these just like really simple physics that is part of the fact that our world spins and orbits the sun, that's free, right? And you
Yeah.
can use it to cool, you can use that concept to heat, right? And so then again, this is opposite. This is for northern. I should have edited it. I apologize. Um, right. So this is exactly what I was describing. So the point is you should be able to look at a building and tell which side faces the equator, right? And then the west side is always, always the hottest side. So if you're trying to stay cool, there should be minimal, if any, windows there. There might be porches on that side to really shade every bit that you can on that side. You might put a tree or a vine or something like that to help keep that side shaded. The other piece of site, and this is one that people don't often think about, is they walk a piece of property and they build on the part that feels magical, but now you don't have that magical spot anymore. So usually when you look at a site, you want to look at the part that needs the most improvement because you're going to disrupt it and you're going to build something there. So you just want to think about it that way. And then there's foundation systems that step lighter on the earth. So one would be pure foundations if you need a floor that's elevated. And so pure foundations are just little like boop, boop, boop in the ground, like posts where you need them and beams in between, and then the framing goes up from there. And the other one is called a rubble trench, where you basically dig a French drain underneath the perimeter of your building. And then you can put any kind of foundation. It can be slab, it can be, right? But the idea is to disrupt as little as possible. So this is one that I use quite often. It's less disruptive because you are only digging exactly the footer that you need. You don't over dig and then backfill. So you disrupt the least amount of soil. It's basically just a big drain. For us, water is a big deal. I know in areas in Australia that water's a big deal at certain times of year, and at other times of year not so much. But water is the single, even in a dry climate, the single biggest disruptor of a foundation is water. Um, yeah, and then you're also minimizing concrete, so it uses the least amount of concrete. And concrete is the largest CO2 producer. So for construction materials, 40% of the CO2 production from all construction materials is the manufacture and use of concrete,
Yeah.
like 40%. So if we, it's low hanging fruit in my opinion. Um, You can also, if you understand your climate, you can create outdoor spaces that are comfortable at different times of the year, right? So if it's a little cooler in winter, warmer in summer, what do you crave in summer? Shade. So make shady areas that are going to be shaded all summer, right? So, and those are really inexpensive ways to improve your lifestyle because being outside is, it's good for vitamin D production, it's good for your soul. Um, it reminds you that you're part of your ecosystem when you're outside, right? Um, and then the other site piece is that, if we're calling natural building, if we're starting with what materials do you have around you in abundance, well, that means you're also looking around you. What do you have in abundance? And it could be just your site. You could define it as a bit larger, right? So what does your region have in abundance? Right? Where we are, there's lots of trees, there's lots of agriculture, and we have lots of clay soil. So that's my primary material palette: stone, wood, straw, clay, right?
Beautiful.
Um, so then the next thing you want to understand is when you're looking at those materials that you have in abundance, you want to understand how they transmit energy, because there are times or situations where you want to slow the flow of energy. So for example, if you were using a system to um, air condition an inside space, then you want the cold to stay in and the heat to stay out, right? Or ideally, you want to design it so you don't need that air conditioning at all, right? But if you do need air conditioning, you want to slow the flow of the heat from outside migrating into the coolness that you've created, right? And so if you understand the properties of your materials, you can do that. So the primary palette is usually some kind of fiber from nature and some kind of sticky glue from nature. And that tends to be, I mean, where we are, agriculture is abundant. So we use agricultural fibers. So wheat, straw, barley, rice, things like that. Everywhere in the world, there are fibers in nature, right? So things that are pliable. Um, and so then when you're thinking about energy, an insulator slows the flow of heat transfer from one side to the other. So if it's hotter outside, that flow comes in. If you're trying to create a warm space inside and it's cooler outside, that flow is out. So heat migrates to cold. And an insulator will slow the flow of that heat transfer. Like if you have a portable cooler, the reason you can keep ice in there is there's insulation between the cooler, like inside the cooler, and the heat outside, right? And it's the same for a house. And the more insulation you have, the less energy you need to keep whatever is comfortable as a temperature, right? And in nature, um, So I often use straw bale. That's because it's inexpensive, it's extremely abundant where we are, and it provides a really high R value. And you want to use those insulators whenever you are going to use energy to change the temperature of your space, then between you, so to minimize that energy between you and outside, you want insulation. And those materials tend to be the ones that are lightweight because it's not really the material that's insulating, it's little pockets of air that are in the material. So that tends to be, again, agricultural fibers. Hemp is wonderful. I don't know if hemp has been a material that's taken off in Australia yet. That has lots of other benefits as well as, for example, it's a carbon sequestering. It's great at carbon sequestering. So it's from a crop standpoint, it's really great. Yeah, so anything that is lightweight, even pumice, right? We think of it as a stone, and stones are heavy. So how could they be lightweight and how could they therefore be insulating? But pumice is a stone that has air pockets in it, and the air pockets are insulating, right? Wool is a great one, is a great insulator, and wool uniquely will keep insulating even if it's wet. Okay, so the opposite in a building is a thermal mass material. And a thermal mass material is a material that can conduct energy and store it, just like your phone battery. So you have to think of it as a battery, but instead of holding electricity, it's holding heat energy. And whenever it's in an environment where there's a energy input, so it could be a fire, it could be the sun shining on it, it could be just the air is warmer than the mass, then it will absorb that heat. And whenever the mass is warmer than the surroundings, it will release that heat. And so in that way, it acts as this sort of like a flywheel, like a battery for that heat storage and release. And it tends to um, create average temperatures over time. And the more mass you have, the more time you are averaging, right? And so this is an example. It's not finished, so it's not beautiful yet, but this is an example where we're using stone, which is a thermal mass. If you've ever um, walked on like a stone patio or a road or a sidewalk that has been in the hot sun all day, and you step on the stone versus stepping on like grass, same day, but the stone will be really hot and the grass is not, right? And that hot stone, that is thermal mass at work. It's absorbing the heat from the sun. And as soon as the sun goes away, the stone is still warm and it's still emitting heat. It's why cities are warmer than the surrounding areas because there's fewer trees and there's more thermal mass that the sun hits, right? So it could be a fire, it could be the sun. You can also use mass to store coolness. So the example would be a cave. When you walk into a cave, it's 57 degrees everywhere in the world. And that's because it's using the mass of the entire Earth, and the average temperature of the entire Earth when you go down is 57 degrees everywhere. And so you could use large mass walls inside an insulated bubble, and it will just constantly pull excess heat energy out of the air. And it's like a free air conditioner there's no system, there's no moving parts, there's no fuel, it's just physics, right? And they can look cool.
Beautiful.
Yeah. And so you can either use that mass to absorb and store the heat energy and release it, right? Or you can use it to moderate swings in temperature. So if you live somewhere where it's hot during the day and cool at night, and you have lots of thermal mass inside the space, it will average the day to night temperatures so that you don't get the heat and you don't get the cool. It's just the average of the two. And now you're comfortable all the time without thinking about it, without a system turning on, right? And so mass materials tend to be the heavy ones, right? Water. Water is a great thermal mass. All clay materials are great thermal mass. Um, Plasters count as thermal mass. So as long as they're a half inch or thicker, a plaster on the wall, evenly distributed, is thermal mass in your space, right? Could be in the floor. You can create benches. You could create half walls. All of those would count as thermal mass. And so like in our climate, we have a mixed climate. We have all 4 seasons, and like where I live, it's literally 3 months of each. And so but it is generally true almost everywhere that if you're not sure, the best solution is a combination of both insulation and thermal mass, where you put the insulation on the exterior. So here I'm putting in a straw bale wall. Um, and then you use clay on the interior of that bubble, and the clay moderates the interior space. So you've sort of made this little bubble that wants to keep um, it wants to keep heat in and it wants to keep heat out, regardless of which season it is. And then by putting lots of mass inside that bubble, um, you're keeping the temperature constant. No matter what is going on outside, the temperature inside wants to stay constant. And again, this is all it's just physics. There's no machine. I mean, then you can use a machine to augment, but if you need a machine to augment, it's tiny. It doesn't need to be as big as if you design a stupid building. Not, an unthoughtful building, let's call it. Let's not be so negative. Um, the other thing to point out, and I don't know, this is probably regionally issues in Australia, but um, clay in particular is hygroscopic, and what that means is it actually attracts moisture to it. And so if you live somewhere humid, the humidity, especially when it's warm, increases your discomfort. So at any given temperature, if it's humid versus dry, the dry you will feel comfortable, the humid you won't. And so clay has this ability to regulate the humidity to sort of this perfect level for humans, where it's not so dry that you feel like you're putting skin cream on all the time, but it's not so humid that you feel like you're sweating and your sweat isn't cooling your body down, right? Yeah. So we've already kind of talked about this, but we're designing for minimal energy use, and there's a couple other tricks up that everyone can have up their sleeve. So passive solar is that we already talked about it. I just didn't name it, which is that notion that when you're facing the equator, in the winter, the sun is low to the sky, and in the summer, the sun is high to the sky, which means um, you can target your windows to either capture sun or not capture sun, depending on what your goals are. And then you're essentially using the insulation, that insulated bubble, and the thermal mass inside, plus the regulation of the solar heat gain at different times of year to, for free, heat and cool the space inside, right? To whatever degree you need to for your climate. Yeah. And so super efficient envelopes just means you look at the whole bubble and you insulate the whole bubble. You usually insulate more above than to the side because 60% of heat gain is up, right? 60%, I'm sorry, is from above, right? So when it's sunny out, there's more heat coming down through your roof than there is through the walls. And that's just because the angle of incidence is more perpendicular. Um, unless you have a really nice big tree that overhangs your house. And then you can actually actively cool a roof with plants. And these are plants, so this looks quite lush because we live in a rainy climate. If you lived in an arid climate, you're basically looking at plants that can survive in your climate without groundwater. So they tend to be succulents, not exclusively, but that's what they tend to be. Because what succulents do is when there is water, they very quickly absorb that water and they store the water in their leaves. So their leaves are like a cistern. So after a rain, all of the succulent leaves are puffy and then they slowly thin out as they use the water. And the reason they actively cool your roof is because just like we sweat to stay cool, plants have transpiration. So we call it perspiration for humans, it's transpiration for plants. And that transpiration is why they don't just fry when the sun hits them, right? Um, and so they're actively evaporating moisture to stay cool. And as they do that for themselves so that they live, they're doing that on your roof. So now instead of having 60% of your heat gain down, you actually have a roof that is cooler than the air temperature because of the plants. So there's sort of these different strategies that you can use to just again, it's just biology. It's not a machine. You're using biology to your advantage. Um, and then for any heat or cooling that you need to augment with, thinking about it as not just high tech, but what is the lowest tech that gets me there, right? So, and I'm not anti-technology. I'm just saying if you use the lowest technology that gets you there, you're going to come up with the simplest solution for your situation. And then finally, we're thinking about health. So in all of that, we've just talked about sort of energy inputs, energy in and out. But when you look to nature for your material palette, when you look to nature to solve your energy concerns, you happen to also be selecting materials that are not inherently doing you harm. They're not, I mean, there's exceptions to this. Like if you pull stone and there's radon, then okay, you're emitting radon into your space. But in general, um, you're putting materials that sometimes are, A, they're just not toxic, but B, clay, for example, can encapsulate toxins. So it will pull, just like it has that magnet to water, it has a magnet to toxins. And so toxins will, like if you've ever gone to a spa and done a clay mask, it's because the clay pulls toxins literally out of your skin, and it can do the same thing in your air, right? So you've literally chosen materials from nature that will do no harm to you. You're also choosing materials that are what's called breathable, which just means vapor permeable. It means that humidity in the air can freely travel through them. What that does is it prevents mold growth. You've never trapped moisture anywhere inside a wall system. And because of that, you tend to not get mold growth because if you reduce total humidity below 18%, then mold is dormant and so it doesn't bloom. So one of my simplest favorite things, this could be in any building, anytime, is if you think about putting clay plasters. And clay plasters help regulate temperature, they help regulate humidity, they help pull toxins out of your air. It's inherently not toxic itself, right? And so it has sort of these multiple benefits. Whoop. Um, Having ample sunlight that doesn't overheat your space is also part of human health. Like we are solar powered and we need sunlight. And so if your space doesn't have some ambient sunlight, it's not healthy. Yeah, so this is just sort of like you want to use materials that you have around you. They're not toxic. You've harvested them without harming the environment. And then design something that's specific to your climate. And when you make all of those choices, you end up with buildings that instead of doing harm, instead of feeling toxic, they remind us that we are part of our ecosystem, and that is inherently healing. I think it's literally physically healing because you're reducing your toxin exposure. But it's also just healing that we're not doing more harm to the planet. And then this is sort of the bonus to me is that, again, I teach for fun because I love watching people get empowered. But to take any group of people and do something super simple, and within a few hours, they feel like they're the expert, and they together as a community build something literal, then it builds this community as well at the same time. And so you're literally building, but you're also rebuilding the mesh of sort of humanity in a way. Not to be overly about it, but you know, because natural building uses really simple techniques that we have the knowledge of, we have stored in our DNA. If you hand anybody a piece of clay, they instantly start to form something with it, right? Because we know in our being that clay is malleable. How do we know that? I don't know. But um, right. But the techniques also tend to be more labor intensive than conventional construction, right? Conventional construction is how fast can a contractor build something so that they can profit more quickly and move on to the next project and make the next profit, right? Whereas natural building tends to be slow. And so if you have something that's simple to learn, but requires more people hours, then it's a great reason to sort of create community as well, right? Hands-on participation. So it's that sort of like, what if, when I ask the what if questions at the beginning, what if we built this way? This is what if, right? You end up with these buildings that are just, I'm just going to flip through these, but they're two examples. One of them, their priority was building on a budget. And so the entire building was built with volunteers, the whole building. So I came and taught classes, and we put the straw bales in, we put a green roof on, we put clay plasters inside, we put lime plasters outside, we put an adobe floor in. And it's a building that when you step inside, and it's passive solar, it uses, like all the windows were salvaged. They're new, but they were salvaged. They were purchased for a project that didn't get built. And you create these spaces that feel you step inside. When I bring people to a natural building and they've never stepped inside before, you can hear people sigh. They walk in and they just go, oh, like you can audibly hear a release because the space holds you and you can feel that it is, um, it's symbiotic to us, right, as humans, instead of I don't know what your primary materials are there, but we're like studs and drywall and flat and latex paint, and none of those are,
That's us.
your body doesn't respond to those.
Yeah, we're the same.
What were you going to say?
Well, that's us. We're
Yeah.
exactly the same. These build up. These are so beautiful. I just breathtakingly beautiful and
And they
healthy.
can be so
That's what we're all
simple.
about.
Yeah.
We're healthy and energy efficient here is not breathable materials, closing everything in tightly. So even now the chemicals are a problem for people's health as well as
Right.
the moisture issues are out of control.
Hmm. Yeah. So clay would benefit in that situation, right? Because it's going to pull the moisture to it. When you have wood that is in contact with clay, the wood is more durable. It lasts longer because the clay keeps the wood dry so it can't rot.
Oh my goodness.
Right. And this is just physics. Like it's just It just does that. You don't have to think about it. You just have to know that it happens and then build that way, you know?
Don't have to charge it.
So this was a really, really low budget building. This particular one was about half of what conventional construction costs because the labor was free, right? It was about building community and teaching. So everybody that came learned something. One of the people who came to these workshops is now a professional plasterer because she was so happy plastering with clay. Right, you can sculpt with it, right? And then this one is an example where their highest priority was quality, and they had quite a bit of money. So it's a different aesthetic and vibe, but it's still passive solar. It still uses the same palette of materials. It wasn't built with workshops. It was built by paying people to come. And same thing though, I went and I taught them how each step of the way. How do you do that? Right. And again, when you step inside, you just go, oh, so like clay walls, the wood is all from the site. So they harvested the wood from the building site.
Oh, wow.
Clay floor. Yeah. Yeah. And so I will leave you with my sort of the piece I hold in my being, which is just if we all if you see a change, just start affecting that change in little ways in your life. And then the next person sees it and they affect the change. So if we all just did that, if we all just, instead of putting our heads in the sand, if we all just be that change, yeah. So that's all I have.
Wow. That was amazing. You definitely speak our language. Definitely. We wouldn't have a job
With a
if
different accent.
oh yeah, we wouldn't have a job if everyone built your building. You had you building their houses. Maybe for EMS.
I mean, to me, like becoming obsolescent would be amazing to me.
Yeah, yeah.
If I didn't have to teach, I mean, not have to, but I love teaching. But if there didn't need to be natural building teachers because everybody knew how to do it, I'd be like, yes, we win. The planet wins.
When are you moving to Australia? we need more. We need more clay homes, natural homes. So beautiful. But there's some questions in here, Dave. Dave, did you want to ask your question? He's probably not able to get. Sometimes he can't get the audio on. So he's asking, does clay also reduce EMF exposure?
No. Well, yes and no. It doesn't. So EMFs are whenever you're running electricity through a wire, there's a magnetic force that comes off that wire. It's just there's a relationship between magnetism and electricity. And so when you have those wires in your home, there is an electromagnetic force that's coming off that wire, period. The clay doesn't like absorb it in the same way it absorbs and encapsulate toxins, but it does block it to some degree. So the thicker the clay you had over the wire, the more you would block that EMF. And I actually had a student at a class who was doing a PhD thesis on exactly that topic. And he brought a little reader to a project of mine that was in construction. And he measured the walls, and there was he had a really low signal of EMFs in the space, even though it wasn't wired like a normal building. The downside of that is you can't get Wi-Fi through the walls either. So you have to have boosters if you want Wi-Fi in your whole house. So, but then, you've just given up that anti-EMF. So if you want no EMFs, then make at least one room that has all the clay and it's the quiet room with no Wi-Fi.
great. That's exactly what I'm after. I mean,
Yeah,
like
so it would
no
help
no
with that.
Wi-Fi. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, it would help with that. Yeah, that's a great
Okay,
question.
James, did you have a question?
Oh, I've got lots of questions, but my questions tend to be very
Brilliant.
practical.
I like it.
Um,
I
I
like
loved
it.
all the photos and I loved all the examples. So when I see the photos, I've got to ask you questions. When I see metal roofing, what is
Mhm.
your means of insulation for the roof? What's your favorite?
Ooh, my favorite, well, it depends on the budget for the client, to be completely honest. But my favorite is to insulate not against the roof, but so if you have, a peaked roof, if you insulate in that basically the floor of what would be the attic, then where we are, what happens is the roof gets quite cold, but it's humid inside, right? So it's cold in winter, humid inside. The humidity goes up, it hits the cold roof and condenses and then drops water into the space. And so you can create a really moldy environment. If you insulate right against a roof and that roof is cold, the humidity goes through the insulation and then the insulation becomes wet over time from that condensation. So that's an issue we have here. So my preference is to always insulate in the flat and then use a batt insulation of some kind. So of those, one of my favorites is just it's blown in cellulose. I don't know if
Wow.
that's available there, but it's recycled here. It's recycled newsprint. Um, and it's always local. So it's whatever your local recycling facility is creating, that's your local source for cellulose. It generally it's really, really inexpensive and it's 100% recycled content and it's local. So that's a favorite. If we're looking at something that's a little more manufactured, I love wool bats. I love hemp bats. So they're just like fluffy
Yeah.
bats that like blankets. Um, um, there used to be a recycled cotton product that was like when they make blue jeans, all of the cutoffs from the fabric, they would fluff those into like dryer fluff and make bat insulation with that. But that has for some reason become very challenging to get, but that's also a good one. So those are probably the top ones that I use.
Oh, and can I also ask, with your ceilings, are you doing a kind of a clay again, or do you use a plasterboard?
It depends on the budget of the client. So it might be wood, it might be plastered, but both of those are substantially more expensive than wallboard. And so
Mm.
if someone's really on a budget, then they probably end up putting drywall. Yeah.
Can I ask another one?
Yeah, go for it.
Um,
Yeah,
do
I
do
love
you
it.
ever get people in urban situations asking for buildings by you?
Yeah, good question.
Yes. And most of the time in an urban setting, it's a renovation situation, right? So it's an existing building, and how do you make it more natural? And honestly, that is the one that can impact more people. Because if what we're saying is we have to build new buildings in order to solve like,
Yeah.
it's so energy intensive every time you build a new building. But if we could take existing buildings and renovate them in ways that made them healthier, more energy efficient, help them regulate humidity better, right? And so that's where like that clay plaster, putting clay plaster on, you can do it on any building. I don't care what the space is. There's a way to clay plaster the inside of that. And it might be half an inch or so, a centimeter. Are you centimeter? Do centimeters or feet?
Centimeter.
Centimeters.
So it might be a centimeter. It might be up to, what would you do? Up to maybe 4 or 5 centimeters, right? Um, any of that helps you. The more mass, the more moderation you'll have inside the space. Um, but half an inch is fairly easy to do on almost any interior space. So if I'm doing a renovation, the first thing we're talking about is let's check all of the insulation that you have. Let's do a blower door test and check where any air leakage is. And then let's get as much clay inside as possible. Where can we do that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I ask another one?
Off you go, James.
Yeah.
Okay,
Brilliant. I love it.
okay. So if we're going to use clay plaster inside, and the occupants really want to try and keep 55% relative humidity inside because they've been educated for house dust mites and things, is that detrimental to the clay layer? Will it pull away and break, or
No,
no?
no, no. It's just how clay works. It absorbs and releases all the time. So it's, yeah. And it regulates you to exactly what is comfortable to humans
Yeah,
by
great.
chance. Yeah, great. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. It was great.
I'll give someone else a chance.
Good
Mind if I-
questions. Thanks, James.
Mind if I ask another question? Is that all right?
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely.
So with clay, I'm aware that some other earthen materials, as you mentioned, stone can emit radon. Do you ever find that with clay? Does that emit anything radioactive?
So radon tends to be in veins, and um, if there was a vein that was running through the clay and you dug up that vein with your clay, then you do have that rate, I forget what the mineral is that releases the radon, but if you have that mineral and you've put it in your plaster, then yes, absolutely. So if you have an area that might have radon, you would test, you just do there's a little short 24-hour radon test that you can do on that just to confirm that you're not pulling that radon into the space. But that's the only, oh no, there is one other one. If you live somewhere urban and you harvest your clay somewhere urban or harvest it near roadways that were in existence pre-1975-ish, there could be lead in your soil. So you either have to go lower in the ground, dig lower in the ground, or move away from where the road is. And that's because gas used to be leaded.
Yeah.
And so every emission from every vehicle had lead coming out of the tailpipe.
Yeah,
So
we've
those
got
are the
some.
two I
Yeah,
know of.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
no, yeah, just going to say, with lead, yeah, we've got some pretty big issues here in Australia in some industrialized and urban areas still, and it's just we're never going to be able to fix the problem, I don't think. And yeah, particularly the inner west of Sydney, near Mount Isa, and I think there's also a place in South Australia somewhere. I can't remember where it is, but yeah, there would just it's the same problem. I think all around the world, anywhere that had industry, heavy
Industrial.
traffic,
Mhm.
yeah, it's old petrol stations even, or gas
Mhm. Yeah,
stations as you would call them.
exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. There's a listing, I can't remember which university. I think it's either University of Minnesota, maybe. There is, but you can Google it. There's a list of plants and which toxin they will uptake from the soil. So for example, there was we call them a brownfield site, that kind of like around an industrial area where it's now become so toxic, no one can live there. And it was the largest brownfield in the whole US, and they cleaned it with cabbage. And it took 3 years, and they plant the cabbage, and the cabbage uptakes, and that was a situation. Yeah, so the cabbage uptakes the lead. It was primarily lead was the primary toxin. So it uptakes the lead, it stores it in the leaves, and then they harvested the cabbage and burned it, and then if you burn it in a stack, you can predict where the lead will come out in temperature of the stack. And they pulled the lead back out so they could then encapsulate the lead. So there are ways to clean it up, and nature is always our friend because nature has solved every single problem already. We just forget to look there. You know, we think people are going to solve the problem, but every time people solve the problem, we make another problem.
Many more problems. Like our energy efficient planned buildings, lots of problems. I have a question, if anybody else doesn't have a question, would be membranes. What waterproof membranes do you use, especially for the roof?
Yeah, so I only use membranes in two places. One is under the floor, if the floor is going to sit on the ground, and that's just to prevent water migrating up. So you do a capillary break with gravel and then a membrane, and that's just, it's called 6 mil poly. It's just a polyethylene sheeting that's thick enough not to tear. So it just keeps the dampness under control inside the space. And then for roofing, if I'm doing a living roof, and these are not natural, right? But you want a leak-free roof.
Oh, yeah.
So these are concessions to the natural. I either use, we call it EPDM. It's an elastomeric rubber membrane, and that one goes on like a big, heavy, weird sheet. It's sort of like scuba gear. And then the other one is a heat seamed, it's called TPO. It's terrapolyolefin, I think is the chemical. It's not like, there are PVC roofs, but vinyl has a very particular issue that it is toxic in every single phase of its life cycle, every single phase. And you can't, like, it's not recycled. It's not, you can't, I don't know. If you look at a map of the world um, wherever vinyl is produced, there is also a cancer alley that surrounds that location because the manufacture of it is so toxic. So it's not a vinyl roof, but it installs similar, and it doesn't have the same environmental impacts that vinyl does. It's still a plastic. It's still like, we're not natural, right? So that's a concession if you're doing a living roof. And so there you want to make sure that the benefit that you're getting from the plants outweighs the environmental detriment of using that plastic. But it's basically a heat seam, so you can do crazy shapes, you know, because it's like putting a really hot hair dryer and then it glues itself together.
Yeah.
So those are the two, but they're not natural. Yeah.
Yep. Very good. And with the clay, like when you're doing like a rammed earth home, is it different for all the clays? There's not you can't get like a mix that you could give us the ratios of things to put in. Is it all different because of the water content?
Yeah, the one challenge, like the challenging thing with clay is it just defines a type of particle. But there's so much variation on what that particle looks like and what the other minerals are in the clay soil, because we're harvesting it from the ground, that it means there are weak clays and strong clays. There are clays that absorb water more or less. There are clays that absorb so much water you can use them to line a pond, right? And prevent water from going down through. And so you have to know your clay and figure out a ratio for your clay. But generally speaking, for most types of clay, around 25 to 30% total clay content, and then, 70 to 65 to 70%. I'm sorry, 70 to 75% would be small aggregate, so sand and smaller.
Yeah.
But for most clays, that's the ratio.
Beautiful.
Yeah. And if you look at areas of the world that have the most clay wall systems, and then you dig in their soil is 30% clay. Like those regions in Africa where they have those, they're like 15-story clay buildings. If you dig the soil, it's perfect. like right out of the ground.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Do we have any other questions while Siggy's here?
Yeah, I've got one more.
Yep. Because it's such an honor to have you. That was such a great presentation, especially for us. We just love everything about that. Go, James.
Thank you.
Sigi, with the with tamped hemp wall construction, I see some people tamp in around a conventional timber stud framing, and it goes in wet. And I've always wondered whether it will rot the timber because you just encase it, and I don't know what goes on afterwards. Would
That's
you
a
know?
great question. Yeah, so the binder that's used is called hydraulic lime. And whenever you hear the word hydraulic, what that means is a substance that cures because of contact with water. So it's chemically changing because of contact with water, like cement is hydraulic. And the lime, so as opposed to an air lime, which just cures by absorbing carbon dioxide out of the air. So that would be an air lime. And a hydraulic lime cures with water. So you're just adding enough water to feed that hydraulic lime enough water to cure. And so it's not absorbing, it's chemically reacting with the water in order to create the hard lime that is now the binder. It's basically turning into stone by reacting with lime, by reacting with the water. So that's part of it, is the water is actually used up in a chemical process in the second thing is lime helps protect wood. So like old lime washing where they would paint with lime on wood, it helps reduce microbial growth, and the microbes are what cause things to rot. And so no microbes, no rotting. So that's the second thing. The third thing is it when it's totally dry, so it feels dry, but it's still drying out slowly over for each inch of thickness. So for each 2.5 centimeters, it takes a week. So the thicker your wall, the more weeks you have to wait. But when it's totally dry, it has that same property that clay has, which is that it absorbs and releases humidity. And so it controls the humidity inside the wall and actually keeps the wood stable longer than it would if it were just exposed to, like just bat insulation, for example, next to it. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
That's a great question.
Yeah, really, thank you.
Sure.
Thank
I
you.
mean, it all comes down to just understanding like what's around us and having a more like science hat approach, biology and physics and chemistry and, the answers are all there all the time. Oops. You know this.
Yes, we just wish we saw more buildings like this, but that's okay. That you've been doing lots of workshops, and there's some people here that do workshops as well. I think it's just more in the early stages. Yeah. Well, thank you very much. That's over an hour now, so we're really, really grateful for your time. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, absolutely. My pleasure, my honor.
Loved it. And we've got lots of other people that couldn't make it that are looking forward to looking at the recording as well. So we really appreciate your time and we hope to see you again.
Awesome. Likewise, I would love to.
And good morning. Have your coffee.
Thank you. Good evening. Sleep
Thank
well.
you.
Thanks, Siggy. Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
You still there, Kelly?